I'm delighted today to be speaking with Johan Odendall, who's the Managing Director for Corpag in South Africa. Welcome, Johan.
Thanks, David.
So we recorded some really interesting webinar content during lockdown, which was great to be part of with you, but delighted to be here today in person at the beautiful Mount Nelson Hotel. Be great to hear a little bit more about your background before we kick off and get into our conversation.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Good to see you again, David. So maybe a little bit about myself. I'm a qualified South African lawyer. I've been qualified for about 12 years. Post admission as a lawyer, I decided to specialize in tax, and professional life kind of happened, and I happened to end up in a position where I was exposed to a lot of cross-border tax and structuring work. And yes, that's kind of where I ended up at Corpag as the MD. And we basically at Corpag, we're a global company with about 25 offices globally. In South Africa specifically, we focus on either assisting private wealth clients with setting up asset protection or family succession planning structures internationally. And we also work with corporates who are looking to expand their businesses overseas or for some reason require managed entities abroad for procurement, import, export, that type of thing.
Okay, great. And you previously lived in Hong Kong and Singapore. Be interesting to hear what you think about the trade links really between South Africa and Asia. Do you pick up any trends with private clients and business owners and their interaction with professionals overseas?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think Africa in general has got long-standing links with the Far East. I think you just need to get onto a plane and fly to most African countries and you'll see the Chinese construction company boards all over. So I mean, there are definitely long-standing links. For us personally at Corpag, we see a lot of importing businesses that obviously leverage off of the economies of scale in the East. So they source products from the East that they sell locally. And conversely, we also have a lot of local clients, especially in the agriculture, wine, that type of industry whose products are in demand in China specifically, and who export to the East. And South Africa is quite nicely placed in the sense that we've got very strong double tax agreements with both Singapore and Hong Kong. Obviously, those are both the big trading hubs in the East. So there are a lot of things that work quite nicely. Singapore and Hong Kong also both operate on a, not going to get into too much detail, but on a source-based tax system, whereas South Africa works on a residency-based system. And there are quite nice ways in which you can actually interlink the two, which do give ways to some benefits for South African companies.
Fantastic. And you've had a busy year working with South African companies going abroad, expanding their business into Europe or US, other markets. Perhaps you could tell us what you see from working with these South African businesses who are becoming more internationalized.
Yeah, exactly. I think naturally, as as the world starts reopening again after COVID, I think a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners have once again realized the fact that they shouldn't put all of their eggs in the hypothetical one basket. They need to look outside, and obviously there are massive opportunities globally. So we've worked with some very interesting businesses. Technology businesses tend to prefer to set up companies in the US because of the fact that there's so much financing available in the US. So if a startup company is able to get their intellectual property externalized to the US, for instance, it creates much better funding opportunities for them in future. And as I said before, with Hong Kong and Singapore, obviously there are natural links with both of them, between them and South Africa, and a lot of business is being done between the two. I mean, so it's difficult for me to point to a specific trend that happened this year, but like we've seen quite a wide variety of global expansions happen.
And you might help them with things like local payroll, getting banking set up. I mean, what are the sort of things, what are the challenges that companies have going overseas, and where do you provide solutions, or what do you see as well them getting wrong?
Perhaps? So I mean, we basically there to assist businesses to set up the initial platform. Like before they actually actively start doing business, they need that business platform. They need a company set up. They need administration processes put in place, regulatory compliance, that type of thing. So we provide all of those services, and then once the business is up and running, yes, ongoing payroll services, accounting services. In some countries you do require an in-country local representative for the company, for instance, which is something
local directors are needed.
Exactly, which is something that we do assist with in a lot of the jurisdictions that we operate in. I think as far as challenges are concerned, I'd say the global move towards having or needing to have substance is becoming ever more apparent. Not only from a regulatory perspective, but also just being able to get access to banking services, for instance. If you want to open up a bank account in the Netherlands, for instance, which is where our head office is based, you need to have employees in the Netherlands. It's no longer a case of you being able to set up a company, get a bank account open. You need to actually have people on the ground to create that substance for the business. So bank accounts definitely a big challenge.
Does that, do you think, change when people are designing new structures, that substance comes into play where they're thinking actually, yes, where might we build up physical presence and people, and where's it believable, and where's it even down to getting offices and things like that? What are all the practicalities? Change the dynamic quite a lot.
Absolutely. I think in the past, clients used to consider many different factors when deciding where to set up. I think in the past, the tax benefits used to be very much at the forefront. Unfortunately, that cannot be the case any longer. You need to look beyond that. You need to look at which jurisdiction would, from a commercial perspective, offer you and your business the best benefit. And obviously that includes thinking, where do you want to send your employees to, because they need to be close to your customers.
Yeah, and also we've seen loop structures being brought in to South Africa as an opportunity for people to invest in South African assets using offshore entities. I mean, have you seen that? What kind of impact do you see that having on the advice and the discussions you have?
Look, there was a big hoo-ha when they abolished the prohibition on loop structures. Was that almost 2 years ago? We did see some clients move towards taking advantage of that, almost using it as a process to consolidate international and local assets into one structure. Unfortunately, the South African Reserve Bank has clamped down on that since I think about April or May of 2022. Basically what happened was the Reserve Bank approached all of the local big retail banks that are normally involved in that process and told them that all loop structures require specific approval from the Reserve Bank. And basically from what I'm being told in the industry is that no new applications are being approved at the moment. So it's sort of a hurry up and wait kind of scenario at the moment. So at the moment, we're not really recommending that to clients because there's so much uncertainty surrounding it. So it'll be interesting to see how it unfolds.
So there's a division between local and international assets? So someone's got an operating business here, it's owned locally, and then if there's a property in London or an equity portfolio in the US, is that the way? And as trustee, when you're running structures, are you often seeing sitting side by side a local and international?
So historically, the general tendency was for sophisticated high net worth clients to basically have mirror structures. So they would have a trust and holding companies in South Africa which owned their local assets. They would effectively duplicate that internationally to hold their international assets. And when the regulations on the loop structures came in and the Reserve Bank said, listen, it's now possible to own local assets through foreign structures, there were some changes because it does make more sense to kind of have everything in one structure. It's just from an administrative and a logistical point of view makes it a lot easier. But as I say, unfortunately, the situation is fairly uncertain at the moment. So my friends that are experts in these areas have told me we should know more when the budget speech comes out in February next year. So there should be some new legislation surrounding that. So yeah, let's wait and see.
And are there difficult assets you find hard to hold in structures here? Like, I mean, trustees taking on operating businesses, board seats, things like that can be a challenge particularly for an offshore trustee looking at owning assets onshore in a jurisdiction. But is that something that you work with on your background in legal and tax gives you, I guess, something extra to bring to the table. But do you find that owning operating businesses is something you would do, or that are owned in trust structures and trustees are part of that conversation?
Yeah, we do, but obviously on condition that there is the required amount of disclosure coming from those operating companies. I mean, as trustees, we do then need to understand what goes on in that operating company on an ongoing basis. But yeah, definitely something that we can help with.
And then also, crypto and digital assets is something that trustees now are being asked to look at in structures because it's coming on the personal balance sheet of wealthy families. I mean, is this something also you're seeing being incorporated into plans, or people are just sort of talking about it at this stage and there's a lot of the question marks are being thrown up more than the answers?
Yeah. So at Corpag, we do see ourselves as crypto friendly. So I know there are many companies out there that have got a complete blanket approach to crypto, saying no, we don't handle any crypto assets. We can handle company structures and trusts where there are cryptocurrencies involved. But obviously, because it is such a new development, and from a regulatory and a tax and on all sorts of levels there are uncertainties, it is something that we do need to approach with caution. So if a client does come to us and say, listen, I've got these assets, I want to put it into a structure, we're definitely open to looking at it, but we need to do quite an enhanced level of due diligence on that.
Understand the source of wealth is a primary risk, isn't it? Exactly. And then also, I think some of the conversations I've been following with trustees are around then how do you actually, say, custody crypto safely, or how do you, if it's a NFT, for example, what do you do with that? Can you insure it? There's so many of these things that haven't quite been solved yet.
No, exactly. I mean, I'm no crypto boffin myself, but I know we had a debate internally about cold wallets versus hot wallets and who keeps the security key and so all still new things that we're figuring out as we go.
But given that exchange controls are part of the picture here that do make cryptocurrency, people are looking at things. The value of the currency is something that people are thinking about constantly, and actually these digital assets are something that is innovation that's welcomed, isn't it? People are trying to incorporate it, but it's working out how to do that in a proper and regulated fashion.
Exactly, and also trying to anticipate what Treasury and the Reserve Bank are going to say about these assets. I mean, I think the latest development was that crypto is treated as a fiat currency, so it's effectively subject to the same exchange controls and tax rules, etc. Yeah.
And where do you see disputes arising? So on the structures, obviously you work with legal counsel or others on these matters, but where do people get things wrong, and how can structures be run properly so that you can head off some of these potential issues?
I think my advice would be that as soon as clients do pick up or anything that might be the subject of a dispute with SARS or whomever, as soon as they become aware of it, I think the advice would be to disclose it as soon as possible. You get a lot of clients that kick the proverbial can down the road and wait for SARS to come to them as opposed to them disclosing it. I think the longer you wait, the bigger the potential downfall could be eventually. And I mean, from an offshore trust perspective, I think the big issue is always going to be the transparency aspect. Like, is SARS and the Reserve Bank aware of the fact that there is an offshore trust, that you are a beneficiary of an offshore trust, etc., which are these days all part of your tax return in South Africa. You get asked, are you a related party to an offshore trust? So my advice would be to not to try to be too clever and to disclose that. And obviously to always rely on good, proper tax advice.
And I mean, one of the issues that always arises with new trusts that are being set up is having that conversation with the settlor about control, the level of control they can exercise. I mean, in whatever jurisdiction, this seems to be something that comes up. Do the South African clients you're dealing with, obviously they're familiar with the trust concept, but is that conversation around the fact they'll have to give up some control in order to get a benefit from this structure something that is difficult to have, or is,
I actually can't remember the last time I had a conversation with a prospective settlor who was not concerned about the control aspect. I had clients this morning in my office saying, well, I don't understand this thing. How do I give legal ownership of my assets? Can I get it back? How do I, so it is naturally, it's always going to be a bit of a worry.
How do you get them comfortable then when in that conversation? How can it develop?
Look, I mean, I try to point out why, for instance, Corpag as a professional trustee would not carry out anything untoward, so to speak. So obviously, from a regulatory and a reputational, etc. perspective, there's no point for someone to abuse their powers as trustee. But also, I think it is, like I told these clients earlier this morning, it is a massive decision to put up an international structure, which is not necessarily a cheap endeavor, and to hand over a portion of your assets to them effectively from a legal ownership perspective. So I think it's really important to, first of all, properly understand what a trust is, what it's supposed to do, how it operates, and also to speak to as many people in the industry as possible. I think that's always, it just gives you that extra level of peace of mind.
And do certain jurisdictions come up in that conversation as places that are good to do business with, that have people on the ground here that are accountable? I mean, what is it that you see in terms of jurisdictions that people are setting up new structures within?
Yeah, so I think that's obviously quite dependent on where your firm has a presence globally. But for us at Corpag, South African clients this year have generally preferred Switzerland as a jurisdiction to set up trusts with us. There definitely are exceptions. We've got clients that have gone to New Zealand for specific reasons, clients to the US.
Switzerland is great where you have the banking assets there also, because it's very neat. The administration and flows of information are very managed, aren't they, versus having structures in different locations.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the historical component also plays a big part. I think South African financial services have long had a presence in the Channel Islands and or in Switzerland. And a lot of, for instance, banks in the Channel Islands are familiar with working with Swiss trusts. So it just makes it easier for all parties involved. If there is some historical knowledge to work from.
Great. And you're coming along to the networking dinner tomorrow night. I mean, do you work in your course of your normal business? Are you working a lot with other intermediaries in banks and law firms and tax advisors here and overseas? I mean, what kind of intermediaries do you tend to work with?
Yeah, we get all our clients through intermediaries.
Okay.
I work mostly with tax lawyers and tax advisory firms, private banks, wealth managers. So quite a big variety of intermediaries. So yeah, looking forward to the dinner and catching up with everyone.
Fantastic. Well, look, Johan, thank you for talking to me today, and we look forward to sharing this interview.
Thanks so much.
The latest technical content delivered through global conversations with professionals for professionals.